Welcome to the Roller Coaster Ride of Parenting podcast. I'm Jenny.
I'm Ben.
And I'm Susanna. And we'll be your hosts as we discuss the highs and the lows of the parenting journey.
We'll be having conversations based on the content from Susanna's book, A Childcare Expert's Guide to Enjoying Your Parenting. Throughout her time as a childcare owner and operator, Susanna has encountered many overwhelmed parents, and she wrote this book to encourage and equip them to be the best parents they can be.
This podcast is an opportunity to share more tips and tricks around the challenges that parents face. It's our hope that through our shared knowledge, experiences, and conversations, we help you to better embrace your parenting and enjoy your roller coaster ride. Welcome back to the podcast. This episode, we'll be discussing the fears that we face as parents, how they challenge us, and ultimately how we learn to conquer them. Once again, we'll be referring to Susanna's book as well as our collective knowledge as parents and people with fears.
So people with fears, that's referring to you and Susanna clearly, because as a man, I don't have fears.
Obviously.
Obviously.
Yes.
What makes that so obvious, Jen? Okay, all right. Yeah, I have a couple of fears around parenting, nothing else. Like maybe I have some fears. So, like, all right, you tell me your fears, and then I might admit to a couple of my own.
Yeah, if they're the same,
Yeah,
like
sure,
if they're okay.
Sure. Yeah.
I don't know, man. Being a parent, like when you have your first child, it's a whole different level of responsibility. Hey, there's fears you did not know existed that all of a sudden you're entrusted with this tiny little life that they rely on you for everything. Like it's immediately your job to keep them safe, to keep them alive, to keep them, here. I don't know. It's things that I totally didn't expect and probably very different with both children.
Yeah.
Like I remember with Max, he's my first, and it was all the things. Like I remember getting up and just going, I haven't heard from him in a couple of hours, and rushing to check that he was still breathing. Have you guys done that? Like holding your finger under their nose and going, yeah, we're good. We're good.
Absolutely.
But then I don't know, like even really serious fears though too, like with our second, Izzy, she was really preemie, like an incredibly hard pregnancy, and she came and she left me and went straight into NICU and has had multiple hospital admissions and like real fears, like real stuff that was just crazy hard. And I think about both of them and I look back and I just think, oh gosh, parenting means you need to be really brave.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Definitely. When you mentioned about the NICU, it immediately makes me think about my middle child, Amelia. I mean, she was only going in to have a grommet operations, but she had a couple. She was only two. So to know your little 2-year-old's going to be under anaesthetic is pretty freaky, watching them knocked out. So I can only imagine what you went through with NICU. So to go from that, like that helplessness, sometimes as a parent, is pretty scary. Right through for me, same child, Amelia, where we'd moved to America for a couple of years, and Amelia's like 5. She took me for a walk one day out from the house, and she sat me down. She said, Dad, how would you feel if your parents moved you to Hawaii when you were my age? And I surf. I'm like, babe, I would have been stoked. I totally didn't get the way she was thinking. I could see her little face drop. She's devastated. I was wise enough to go, okay, what are you trying to say here, babe? And I said, are you not enjoying living in America? And she was like, no, none of my family's here. She was like really bummed at us. And I had a fear then. It's like, did I do the wrong thing? Did I do the wrong thing moving my family to the other side of the world? She got over it pretty quickly. She made some more friends. We were all good like weeks later. But I have definitely had lots of moments as a parent where I'm like, am I screwing this child up? That's totally a fear for me at times. Yeah. So, Susanna, we've shared a couple of our fears.
Yeah.
How have you worked around your own fears as a parent or in your parenting journey?
Well, I guess when you look at it, this is really a big part of what we call the roller coaster ride. And the fears as a parent are so varied, but so real. And and Jenny's saying that, the real fear when Izzy was so unwell, and yet the real fear, it's just a stronger fear when you bring your first home and you're testing, putting the finger under its nose to see if it's breathing. Somehow or other, it's almost just as big a fear because that's, particularly the first one, you're learning so much. And we don't know so much when we become parents. And really, pretty much all the way through the journey, there's so much we don't know. And so I think fear is a big component of parenting. However, I think we can have fears that we really don't need to have. And some are easier overcome than others. And again, it's like I always say, every child is completely different. So what helps us overcome fears with one child or teaching them to overcome their fears can be very different to how you would teach another child. So there's no black and white in it, except to admit that the fears are there. And when we can admit they're there, then we can actually work our way through it. But if we don't recognize what the fear is, and I do have a little bit of I think pretty sure in the book about how fear is like can be, but not always. Fear can be a false expectation appearing real. Now that's true probably, I would say, in 90-odd% of our fears that we have as parents. So it's working out what's false about it, what's appearing real that isn't really real. And yet sometimes, like in the case with Izzy when she was so ill, those fears were real. They weren't a false expectation appearing real. They were actually, that was the truth of it. The child was so very desperately ill. So there's working out even the different kinds of fears that we're facing. Has somebody else put a fear into us because of things that they've said? Like I always dislike immensely when people go and talk about the terrible twos, and so I find a lot of parents are expecting that child when it turns two to change its behaviour and that behaviour be negative. Yes, 9 times out of 10, they will be changing, but that's just because they're going from one stage to another. It doesn't necessarily mean it's terrible twos. I actually like to call them the terrific twos and expect that child, even though it's different to what it was because it's growing and it will respond differently to different things, I'm expecting to be having a terrific time with that child instead of expecting to have a terrible time. And because I do believe that a lot of it in life in general is what you expect is what's going to happen. So our response will be completely different to that fear of that child changing it to if we have the view of it's a terrific two instead of a terrible two. So our mindset very much gauges on how we handle the fears. But there's really no black and white about this is what you should do with fears. It just depends on the child, the situation, and the parent for that matter.
I've been experiencing the twos again, even though my youngest is 9.
Yes.
Because Maddie at 19 is babysitting for money. So
right.
The little girl that she babysits is 2.
Yes.
So she does love the word no.
Yes.
But she's exploring who she is.
Absolutely.
She's exploring her environment. She's finding her own voice. And yes, that might be challenging, but there's something beautiful about it too. So, and having expectation around, like you're saying, rather than seeing it as a challenge to my authority, actually seeing it as her finding her voice. And it's definitely annoying at times even, but it's the only way she's going to become a fully formed little human is to work through these stages like you were talking about.
Absolutely.
And so embracing that stage, what's going on, rather than finding everything hard, but finding the beauty in amongst the mess.
Because those no's can be very exciting to a parent, because the parent can be going, oh, she's actually learning to think for herself. Because that child is going to need to learn to think for itself. But then it's up to us as parents not to get irritated by the process she has to go through to learn how to think for herself, which part of it will be no. And a lot of it will be no until she knows what to do with no. And when a no is appropriate and when a no isn't appropriate. But what an amazing privilege we have as parents to be able to teach the child that and be developing it so that it can be, have a really abundant life and know what's appropriate and what's not appropriate.
So we were talking off air that one of my favourite stage for my kids was being a teenager, having teenagers, and you were the same. And yet, like, it's a fear I hear talked about all the time by parents. What do you think? Why do you think we were able to? I mean, I followed you in that. I really saw you as an example, and I was a youth worker by trade, so teenagers didn't hold any fear for me. I love being around teenagers. They were challenging, very challenging,
Yeah.
but lots of fun. I was excited. I love their energy. Why did you enjoy parenting teenagers?
I think for exactly the same reason as I enjoy the 2-year-olds, because, and I still love teenagers, really love them. I'm like you, I love the vibe. I love the fact that they will take the risks. I love the fact that they say exactly what they think, and they're not going to worry about what they, what they've said. I love the fact that they are at that stage of life where they're not quite sure who they are yet, but they're learning it. And so they take risks, or hopefully they take risks. If as parents we've taught them how to take risks. And I love watching them have a go at things that as we get older, if we're not careful, we don't like to take risks and we sit back from. I love their enthusiasm, how they go full on. I love all that. But again, all those things can be challenging to us as parents if we have the attitude of, well, like, let's face it, all teenagers, they know everything, right? We know that. But instead of getting uptight about that, just go, well, I was like that as a teenager too. I knew everything when I look back. And so when we realize it's just part of being a teenager, but how we can encourage them and build them up and mold them to be the people that they're really desiring to be, how we can teach them to, they've all got dreams, but some of them have maybe had their dreams squashed as a child, so some will dream better and easier than others. But if we can draw those dreams out in them, I mean, what an awesome privilege as a parent to be able to draw that out of them and be feeding into them the excitement of life instead of going quiet and down. But just, really being excited with them and helping them. I just love it. They're so full of life. And to be perfectly honest, they keep us oldies thinking young. Like there was a study done years ago where they put people the age I am now, coming up to their 70s, they put half of them with a group of young people and they live with them for 6 months. They put the other half with a group of people their own age and they live with them for 6 months. They tested them at the end. The ones that live with the teenagers had improved physically, emotionally, and emotionally, out of sight. The ones that live with people their own age had all declined. Not necessarily a huge amount, but they'd all declined. Why? Because teenagers have got life in them and they breathe life into you and they help you think outside the box. Whereas when we're only with people our own age, whether you be nearly 70 like me or whether you even be in your 30s, you just stick with people your own age, you're going to become stale. Teenagers, mate, they put life into you.
I have a question for you because you guys have had a lot more experience because you're a parent of teenagers, Ben, and you're a parent of teenage grandchildren.
Yeah.
But I guess having kids that are 6 and 8, I often think about being really intentional with how I teach my kids to navigate things that they're afraid of. And it's just really interesting because fear is often one of those things that just happens. Like you go, it's that fight or flight. You're instantly afraid of something, and often it's an emotional reaction. But I often try to think about ways to really push my kids into situations that, might be out of their comfort zone. But then I know it's my job as a mom to protect them, so that kind of tension between exposing them and keeping them safe. I would love some tips because we're probably hitting that next stage of, going through primary school and what you've seen. How do we practically do this?
Well, I know for myself, one of the ways I really prepared my kids for being teenagers was when Ben went into year 7, and it's the same as like when they go into 2s. When they go into high school, it's a whole new world for them. And so they have so many more challenges, so many more fears that come around them. So you'll often find all of a sudden you've got a different child on your hand. I can remember saying, good grief, what happened to that boy I used to have? But it was a good it was a good thing for me because I learnt then that what I had to do was sit, and they will definitely push the boundaries then, just like a 2-year-old does, only worse because they are older. But what I found was worked for me with Ben was I sat him down, and first of all I tried to continue to parent him like I did when he was in primary school. And then I realised that just wasn't working, and I needed to change because we'd never been headbutting each other before. He'd been a normal child and I'd been a normal mother where, he wasn't perfect and I wasn't perfect. But there wasn't that every time you looked at each other headbutting. Whereas we started doing that. Every time we looked at each other, we were butting heads. And so what I learnt to do was major on the majors and minor on the minors. And by showing him that I'm going to give you more responsibility, and as you show me you can handle that bit of responsibility, then I'm able to give you more. But you have to show me first of all that you can handle this responsibility. Now, in that way, that was one way of helping him overcome his fears, because giving him more responsibility meant that he had to step out on his own and not be under mum and dad's wings. So that was an element of fear coming into that. But encouraging him that I know you can do this. I'm giving you the responsibility because I know you can do this well. And so it might have been like we were talking before, you were talking about your children, giving them a little bit, they can go a little bit further away to their friend's place or stay away a little bit longer. Those sort of things are preparing them to overcome fears because they're learning how to step out and think for themselves, and it's helping them see that they can make good decisions, because fear usually comes around, am I making the right decision or not? Same with us with parents. A lot of our fears as parents is, am I doing this right or am I not? So the more we show them that we have confidence in them to make good decisions, and that every time they make a good decision, that puts them in a position where mum and dad believe in them and are able to give them a little bit more responsibility. I think that helps them overcome fears. But there's many, many, many ways depending on what the fear is, I guess. What about you, Ben?
Yeah, I think one of the things I picked up, not just from mum, but especially as a youth worker, was that what we all want in life is to feel safe. And teenagers especially want to feel safe. They're so stressed out of their heads going, where do I fit? I don't fit at school. I don't fit at home. I'm changing. What's the world got for me? That if you can be safe when they make mistakes, if you can be safe when they're pushing your limits. One thing teenage boys do when I worked in high schools is they come and punch you in the arm, and they punch you in the arm to see if you're going to react. Because if you don't react, then you're safe. If you do react, then they're going to not want to have anything to do with you. Every young person I worked with did that same thing in a different way. They tried to test me to see whether I was going to be safe. And kids do that with their parents all the time. The young people that I worked with that might have had a bit of a cheeky glint in their eye and they might have done some crazy stuff, if mum and dad love them unconditionally to the best of their ability. It's funny, Susanna and I have different beliefs around this. Like, I don't know if anybody can love somebody unconditionally. Susanna would say you can, so we differ a little bit there. But those that gave it their best shot and provide safety by loving that child no matter what they did, kids tend not to do anything destructive to their safe space. They might push the boundaries, but if you're safe, they're not going to screw that up. They're not stupid. They're just changing. They're just trying to find their way. And if you can be that safe space for them, it's massive. And they're the kids that I saw in their 20s, because I did youth work for a long time, that transition back to their parents a lot quicker too. They're pushing away because they're finding their own identity. They're actually not rejecting you. They're just trying to find themselves. And if you can stay safe and love them despite their pushing, it's so, so powerful. The opposite happens though. If you're not safe, then there's no reason to listen to you. There's no reason to be connected to you anymore. You are an idiot. For a while, in your child's mind, you don't know anything. But if you're going to be unsafe, then there's no reason to listen or to be part of your world. And often they're the ones, the less safe you are, the less likely they are to come back. And I know it's a challenge. It's a challenge for every parent to love unconditionally and to be that safe space, because teenagers definitely they are a lot more intelligent, they're a lot more mature, so they're better at pushing your buttons because they know where they are more as you get older.
It is interesting. Like as teenagers, they're kind of on that cusp of being an adult, and they're being exposed to a lot more, and the boundaries are a lot wider. It's an interesting thing as well, though, with the kids in primary school. Like that's where we're living right now, is that primary school space. And like I'm finding even in the past couple of months here in Australia, we've had massive fires. The past week we've had a lot of flooding. In our house, we don't necessarily watch the news at night. Like I've tried to, in some ways, safeguard them from being exposed to a lot of things that will make them afraid. But at the same time, I want them to be really aware of the world that we're living in and that empathy and, all the things that go with it. But even driving here today, my little boy Max, he said to me, and it wasn't, I could hear the anxiety in his voice, but he said, "Oh, Mom, I had a dream last night that there's this big hill that's kind of by the ocean close to our house." And he said, "I had a dream that there was giant like water flood coming down it." And he said to me, he was like, "Oh," and I was the only one who saw it. So he's like, "I was yelling and I was trying really hard to tell everybody that we weren't safe." And he said, "I was calling for you." And it was really like he wasn't necessarily super upset, but you could see the environment around him like was impacting him. It was affecting his dreams, and everybody's a little bit, scared at the moment. Do you have any ideas of how I could actually? I need to have that conversation when we get back in the car, like how to actually talk to him about it and normalize it in a way, but make him feel safe.
Well, I think one of the most important things is just to sit with him in it. Is actually one of the things that I didn't do well with my children when they were young. Because I'm a super positive person, I would tend to say, "Look, it'll be okay, you'll be all right, Mummy and Daddy will look after you," and move on. But I've learned that is one mistake I did make. And so I think it is important to sit with them in it, but it's getting that balance of sitting with them in it long enough without letting them wallow in it, where the fear just gets deeper and deeper. But you've got to sit in it long enough to actually hear all the fears that they have behind it. So that might mean asking them questions. How did that make you feel? Are you feeling fearful that might happen? And then peg it back from there and try and help him see how, yes, the fires have happened. Yes, now a lot of people have had floods because when we finally got the rain, there was a bit too much in some places. So some people have had their homes and things flooded. Yes, all that has happened. However, you're safe here with us, just help him see the things. Can you see all the places that were saved, all the houses that were saved? Can you see, all the firemen that have worked so hard, and point out the good that's happened as well. It's been, and talk about him. It's been amazing, hasn't it, Max? Just watching people come in and help each other in this, and look at all the good that's come out of it. So if you can help him see the good and the bad, because the bad's happened. But I agree with you, not letting them watch at this stage, not letting them watch the news all the time. It's not to avoid them from knowing the truth, but it's better if they get the truth from you, because it's probably going to be a much more balanced truth, because unfortunately media does always emphasize the worst, because for some reason or other we seem to look at the worst more on TV, so they'll keep giving us the worst. But if you can balance that out, I think that will help him a lot. And then maybe even you can sometimes even get them to do a painting around it, which helps him bring out his fears and things and talk about it more, and maybe even write a little story about it and ask him, to write how he would like to see it happen rather than how he dreamt it to have happened.
That's really good, because sometimes I think that like that tension of sitting in the fear and like acknowledging it.
Yeah.
And like, because I think sometimes, I mean, we were joking at the beginning of the podcast, like we don't have fears, like there's no, fears are a weakness. But like that do you think fears are a weakness, or how would you encourage kids to talk about their fears? Like, do you see them as a strength or a weakness?
I see them as a definite strength, because vulnerability is absolutely one of the biggest strengths anybody can ever have, because you can't have courage without vulnerability. There's no way. There's no way Max can have the courage to face his fears unless he's learned how to be vulnerable. So you sitting with him is teaching him how to be vulnerable, but how to do it safely. And you're encouraging him because you're a safe person he can share this with. He doesn't necessarily need to share it with everybody else because you're the safe person, like Ben was talking about with teenagers. It's the same with children from day one to day whatever. If you're a safe person, they can work through it and talk through it with you. And you can take them through when you're sitting with them with it at the right time, after you're confident that they've really been able to express everything they're feeling. Then potentially in this, you can help him see the false expectation that's appearing real in that, and where that false expectation came from. And yet the fires are very real for those children that have had to live through that, and the floods are very real as well. But so help him see the reality and help him see the things that are a false expectation, and then giving him the tools to be able to cope with that.
I think living through Susanna's parenting around this, and even my dad as well, they're, like Susanna alluded to, they're both very positive. And so because they were so positive, often they would, when we had fears, want us to move through it very quickly rather than just sit in it. What she was articulating before is that I think we look back now and can see that sometimes it's good to actually sit in that fear, to acknowledge it and to be present to it, but not to wallow in it, I think was the word that you used.
Yeah.
And something I probably was going down a similar track to the way I was raised, but my wife's a counsellor, so she has a different take on it, and I've tried to learn bits and pieces. I'm still probably more likely to push through things and sometimes to tell the kids to suck it up and have a cup of concrete and move forward, but it's not as simple as that, and I'm learning that that's probably a mistake I've made. And like I've spoken about this with Susanna, I've picked up from her, but being okay with that. I definitely, there's things I could have done better as a parent for sure. And in some ways I parent Tilly in a healthier way than I parented Maddie. There's 10 years between them. That's okay. I'm sure Mum parented Daniel, who's 10 years younger than me, in some ways healthier than what she parented me. You only live through, you learn through your mistakes sometimes, hey? So we all move forward.
Yeah, and I mentioned that in my book, actually, that I think it's towards the end, that was one big mistake that I did make. But you know what? I've made that mistake, but all my 4 kids are strong, healthy adults living an abundant life. So again, because I made a mistake, they haven't broken. They're fine. They're strong, healthy people. But they've learnt from my mistake, and I'm sure they're going to maybe listen to their children more than what I did. So that's okay. They're improving on my parenting. I've created a platform for them, and they'll fly higher than me as parents. But that's all part of being in an environment where, and hopefully that's what this book is doing, that's what I'm trying to achieve with this book, that people will learn from the things that I've learned from, and then they'll do an even much better job than what I've done as a parent. And for me, that's how it should happen. But I also very much feel that if you want to teach a child how to overcome their fears, you have to take them on the journey of you overcoming your fears. When they see you as a parent have fears and you push through and you overcome them, that empowers them to go, oh, that's okay for me to have a fear then, because I'm going to be like Mum or Dad and I'll overcome that fear. And I cover that in my book too, around, which I won't go into now, you can read it in the book, but how I, a couple of years ago, climbed Table Mountain in Cape Town in South Africa. Now, there's a whole lot around that of fears that I had around achieving that. But to be able to overcome the fear, first of all, was amazing for me, and to do that and succeed. But then to be able to talk to my grandchildren about, this is what Grandma did. Grandma was scared witless. Grandma actually hates heights. Grandma had to overcome her physical challenges at 67 to make this of it. But these were the steps Grandma took. And she did it frightened, but she succeeded. Then that sets that helps them and it helps our children. So you've got to take them on the journey of your fears. Don't be frightened of showing your children that you have fears. Because when you overcome those fears, help them see how you're overcoming them, help them see what the journey is, the decisions you've made to overcome them. And then they'll start to learn by example. Children will always catch much more than what they're taught. Always. They will always catch more than what they're taught. And we have to remember that as parents.
Yeah, so that's been an invaluable lesson for me as your son, and to be in that environment. I think fear is an environmental factor. If you're in an environment where there's a lot of fear, you take on a lot of fear. If you're in an environment where there's a lot of positivity, with a lot of expectation around good things happening, but sometimes bad stuff can happen too, we create that environment. An environment for me is massive. And I'm conscious of the environment I'm creating for my kids, or I'm trying to create. And to create a space where they can process their fears, have them, but work through them. And to be a vulnerable parent like you were for us, open to your mistakes, open to your fears, and doing it in a way that was healthy, not putting your fears onto us, but actually trying to move through them. Although, I picked up your fear of snakes, I think, so yes, I'm gonna put that one on you. It's totally your fault.
But I overcame it, so you can overcome it.
So the next podcast, we're gonna let you hold a snake.
Sure.
And look, I want to be totally open here. Whatever way you go about parenting, you never know what the outcome is going to be. Because I have one of my children who actually suffers from anxiety. But however, that child, who is now an adult, openly tells me that if he hadn't had the upbringing we have, he would be, that anxiety would be strangling him. But he's in the journey of learning how to overcome that anxiety, and he's doing really, really well. Now, potentially he is one that I should have sat in his fears with a bit longer, and I didn't. And potentially if I had his journey would be even easier for him now as an adult. But at the same time, again, I didn't do it perfectly, but I did it well enough, and Rob did it well enough for this anxiety, which so many people are suffering from today, much more than years gone past. He wouldn't be overcoming it as well as what he is if he hadn't lived with parents that lived with fear. I don't quite know where he would be with his anxiety, but he's doing brilliantly now. But it's a reality of life for him that it's always a challenge of something that he has to work on. Sometimes are better than others. Just being totally honest out there, no matter how you parent, you can't be guaranteed. And again, it's the same thing. I've got 4 children and they're all different. He's the only one with anxiety. But when I look back, I see as a child there were so many signs that was going to be a potential for him. But he's doing fabulous, so it's good.
It is really interesting. I'm thinking about on a lot of the things we've talked about, and just thinking about how in the same family, in the same kind of environment, I have 2 very different kids with how they deal with anxiety, deal with things that they're scared of. Max is very much probably a little mini version of me. He can reframe a situation real fast. I'm scared of this, but here's the silver lining to that. So he'll flip it into something positive really quickly. And I don't know if, even teaching him how to step back and go, okay, well, hold on, let's stay in that sore spot. Let's stay in that pain a little bit longer. Let's stay in what's actually scaring you to help him get that depth. But then Iz, on the other hand, she will never be the first thing to do anything. She will watch and she'll take in all the information, and generally, after she's seen 2 or 3 kids do something, she'll do it incredibly well, but she's never going to be the first one to act. She's always going to be the one that's a little bit more hesitant. Yeah. And it's interesting, the way I kind of expose them to different situations that I never know. You just never know. I know what they're kind of predisposed to,
Yeah.
but the way you actually push them is very different, or the way you
That's good,
teach them is very different.
Yeah.
So it's kind of, there's not really everything seems to not be a black and white. There
Yeah.
seems to be very much
Absolutely.
that wisdom in how you approach it.
Yeah. Yeah. That discernment.
Mm.
Yeah. But know that as long as they feel safe with you, as long as they feel loved, as long as they feel valued, and as long as you believe in them, believing in them is a huge thing, then they will overcome.
Well, thanks so much for sharing some of your fears as a parent and for actually sharing some of the things that helped you and your children work through their fears, even as a grandma. So thank you for that. I really appreciate the discussion, and it's definitely something that's very pertinent, I think, for all parents, thinking through their fears and their kids' fears. So thanks for that discussion, Susanna. Really appreciate your thoughts.
Yeah, and next time on our podcast, we're going to be talking about the words we speak and the impact that they have on our kids.
Awesome. So you're listening to this conversation today. If you really appreciate it and would like to learn more, you can also buy Susanna's book. It's on Amazon.com. And apart from that, we just want to really encourage you to enjoy your roller coaster ride.